Tonight we are in the 8th book of Yisrayl, persecuted but not forsaken. And we are in chapter 9 on page 105. The date of the sermon is 3/15/08. So that's almost 12 years ago that this sermon was given. The title of the sermon, or the title of the series, is Come Out From Among Them and Be You Separate, Touch Not the Unclean, number 3. And then the individual title for this particular sermon is World Hunger and Nuclear War Brought About by Authority of the Beastly System. And we'll be covering a little bit of this in this portion of the class, where it shows that it is brought about by the authority of the beastly system. So on page 1 we have the praise Yahweh, the greetings, not page 1 but verse 1. And, Pastor says he looked great, and if you have listened to this series of sermon, there was loud cheering and praises to Yahweh at that time, because this was, a few weeks after Pastor was released from jail, and of course this was during the height of the persecution of the House of Yahweh at that time. And then Pastor commenced on a sermon that was given by the great Kohan Shaul Hawkins, talking about being eyewitnesses to the events that were taking place. And if you look at verse 4, he talks about fasting. And this is the time period back in 2008, 2009. We were doing a lot of fasting at that time. This is where we were doing the OCC, the Oki Complete Cleanse. And, we were fasting for, many people were fasting for sometimes weeks, sometimes a month, sometimes 40 days. But ever so often, Pastor would ask the congregation to fast, in all of us fasting together, so that we could ask for Yahweh's help and His protection. And he says, I want you to start thinking about fasting again. Now I'm thinking about a 13-day fast. If you want to write this down, start after sundown on 4:06:08. Now this starts the new moon of Abib. And if we fast like 13 days here, we will end the fast after sundown on 4/19:08 at Yahshua's memorial. And we'll end it with the bread and wine. And then he says, no, we'll have to end it before that, because you can't come to his memorial hungry, if you remember the scriptures. So we'll have to end it and have food before his memorial there. But anyway, be thinking on that and write it down. Of course, if you can't fast, that's fine. And this is something that throughout that time period of fasting, no one was ever forced to fast. He was asked to. If you could, you did. If you couldn't, if you couldn't, you just couldn't do it. He says, I'm not going to force you. I'm just asking that all who can, we should do this. We got such great results out of the last one, and I needed that fast myself. I needed it really bad. And the fast, your fasting, it brought strength to me. And this is something that, we can do occasionally from time to time, where we fast for the work. We fast for the House of Yahweh, or, you could fast for building the House of Yahweh. And this really helps the work, and it helps the call-out ones. And as Pastor said, your fasting, it brought strength to me. Believe me, it brought me strength, and I appreciate it. And your prayers, and your crying, and your mourning, all of this for me and the work, the whole House of Yahweh, which, we are all together, as the great Kohan Shaul just showed you. So fasting, it's really something that, again, it's really beneficial for yourself as an individual. When you do fast, any type of fast is beneficial. But when you do it for the work, it really helps the work of Yahweh. Not for yourself, but doing it for the work, doing it for others in the work. It really helps. And it's something that, again, you don't have to draw attention to yourself when you're doing it, but you can do it secretly, and Yahweh will reward you accordingly, according to your works. He goes into an article here, and the title of the article is Keeping America Hooked on Drugs is the name of the article. And then he talks about the alliance between the big drug companies and the U.S. government that helps American help Americans keep hooked on drugs. And then he talks about the ads, the drug advertisement that is on television. And if you watch the news, especially local news, you will always see these ads for drugs. If you read any of these magazines like Newsweek and Time Magazine or even National Geographic, you'll see like they'll have 2-3 pages just filled with one drug being advertised. Just 2-3 pages of, you see the drug, then you see the benefits, then you see all the side effects, which they put in really, really fine writing that if you have trouble seeing, you'll have to take a magnifying glass just to read a little details of all the side effects that this particular drug can bring. But this is something that he's saying that, the media and everybody is in on. He says, these drugs are silent killers and do not receive the attention they should from the media. And he says, well, of course not. The media's profiting from it, brethren. And if you think about it, if you have to advertise a drug, whether it's via the television or whether it's by print, you have to pay to do so. You have to pay for that 30-second spot, or you have to pay for that minute spot, or however long the ad is. So there's really no interest in the media condemning the drug because it will cut into their profits, because it will cut into the ads that they're putting forth in order to encourage people to take these drugs. Verse 7, prescription drugs are killing people by the tens of thousands every year. There's a pill for everything. There are even pills for the pills. Our society is locked up in the cuckoo's nest. We have pharmaceutical sales representatives visiting our doctors constantly, trying to push their pills in hopes of increasing sales and ultimately increasing the profits. And of course, you have seen this over and over to where, a drug company will get a particular drug, they'll get the doctors to start promoting this drug, and the sales they will rack up billions of dollars in sales. And then much later on, you'll start hearing about the harmful side effects of that particular drug, or how many people have become hooked on that drug, and then they start suing the drug manufacturer. But that's after they have made billions of dollars from that particular drug, and there's no telling how many countless lives were ruined by taking that drug. In verse 8, he says, I told you that things are not just happening, accidentally. If you remember, I brought that out last week. I brought it out before. The first time I brought this out was back in the sanctuary in Abelin. That's now a press room. And I think I called it, a curse causeless does not come, because that's what Proverbs calls it. And if you look at every problem in the world today, there's a cause behind it. It's not just coming about by accident. Even with the global warming, as the world looks at it, they think it's just the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But we know that it's due to mankind's sins. That's the cause of it. So there's a cause, there's a reason for everything that we see taking place at this time. It's not occurring by accident, or as Pastor said, happening, and he used that word intentionally. Verse 9, but these things are, I can see in prophecy. And this is really important to note, because this is really what sets Pastor apart from everyone else, all the preachers, all the other religions, is that he sees these things in prophecy first. He doesn't look at what's going on in the world and then look in the scriptures to find the prophecy. No, he knows what the prophecies are, and then when the event starts taking place, it matches up with what he has already seen in prophecy. That's how he's able to warn us about the things to come. He says, but things are, I can see in prophecy that these things are prophesied to take place. And of course, I've told you before they come to pass, and of course, we are seeing them come to pass, because Yahweh said they're going to come, but they're going to be the worst ever in this time period. Not just in a time period, but this particular time period, the time of the end, when the message of the kingdom, this message of the kingdom, will be preached in all the world, and then the end will come. That's the time he was talking about. And of course, we know that we are in the last 3.5 years, and I believe it was in the last Book of Yisrayl certification class that the great priest mentioned that if you think about it, 1 year has almost passed already. So you could see how quickly that time is going. And yet, when you look at the news, you can see the worst of everything taking place at this time, things that is unprecedented, things of, that is historical. But it's all for this particular time period. And he says, now we saw wars, we saw nuclear, the nuclear baby. We saw it formed, set up, got ready for, and then we saw it stopped. And of course, if you're paying attention to what's going on in Syria, you could see that the groundwork is laid once again for that nuclear war to take place in and around the great river Euphrates. And it's really amazing as to, it's like the entire world more or less is fighting in Syria. Each have different sides, each have taken different, areas over. And everyone is saying that if that conflict gets out of hand, it can easily turn into a world war because all nations are there. The United States is there, Russia is there, Turkey is there, Israel is there, Iran is there, other Gulf countries are there. All nations are tied into that region, and it's a situation that can easily get out of hand. Now, Pastor started talking about Fallon, the admiral, and he gets into this article about he resigned. Now, if you remember the book on the birth of the nuclear baby, you would remember that he was the admiral that delayed that strike that was going to take place at that time. And of course, let's read the article here, or part of what Pastor says. He says, if you saw on the news where he had resigned, well, here's an article on it. It says, Fallon resigns, one admiral too many. And that came out 3/13/08. But it says, Admiral William Fallon, with his forced resignation as head of the U.S. Central Command overseeing Middle East operations. Now, the Middle East, they're talking about that fourth part of the earth that's mentioned in Revelation 6 and 7 and 9. The fourth part of the earth where it's given unto the quartet to bring death to a third part of man over the fourth part of the earth, over that fourth part of the earth. And he's saying that this is getting out of hand. Now, we're going to get back into that article, and then Pastor talks about the King James Version Bible that he had, and he was going to use that throughout the sermon, that King James Version, which was copyrighted back in 1945, and that's shown in verse 15. And he showed that it had his name and his address. This is shown in verse 16. It says Buffalo Bill Hawkins, and it gives the address 990 North Maple Street, Stanberry, Missouri. He says, that's where I went to college, and it's put out by the World Publishing Company. And he says, I'm going to use that in this sermon today because of someone. They're probably gone. They was probably gone 6 months before they wrote the letter, but they said they came here because they heard there was a man who understood the scriptures and was teaching salvation and the way into the kingdom. Well, they said after this trouble arose, Yahshua said after the trouble arose, they tuck tail and run. That's what he said. Now, this is talking about the persecution that came upon the House of Yahweh in late 2007, early 2008 with pastors' arrests and everything that was going on at that time. And then he continues, it says, 3 out of 4, he said, will fall away. 1 out of 4 will remain strong, he said. That's what he showed in the House of Yahweh. So you're the 1 out of 4. And, man, when he gave that sermon, there were many in the House of Yahweh at that time, and many of that 1 out of 4 are not here today. Many of them have left the House of Yahweh. And this is something that, being in the House of Yahweh is just something that none of us should ever take for granted. That we are part of the House of Yahweh. And if you have been here a long time, you should never take it for granted, because it's by Yahweh's mercy that you have been here this long, and Yahweh will continue to sustain you as long as you remain humble. But I want to look at this 3 out of 4, because this could be some scary statistics if you think about it. just to remain in the house of Yahweh, only 1 out of 4 is going to remain, and you take that, that's 5 out of 20, that's 25 out of 100, you would think, well, I don't see that many people here, or it's possible I have never seen that many people in the house, but, brothers, people fall away even before they get to the house of Yahweh. No, seriously. People fall away even before they make it to Abelin, before they make it to Abel. And there's really no telling how many people have been called and never set foot here, because they never made it to Abel, or sometimes they made it one feast and you never saw them again. They just came one feast and you never saw them again. And this is what this parable is all about in Matthew chapter 13. And I'm going to spend a tiny amount of time on it. I'm going to look at Matthew 13, Yakin and Mark chapter 4, and Luke chapter 8. They're all the same parable. And I would say that all of us go through the 3 out of 4 in one phase or another. I remember, the first seed is the one that, I'm not going to read through the entire parable because I really want to focus on seed number 3 and number 4. But the first one is the one that, that gets plucked up really quickly. And I remember going through that experience because I remember when I was first called, I came to the house of Yahweh, one service. The second Sabbath I couldn't attend. And along came someone, which was my mother at the time, and she started to try to convince me that being part of the house of Yahweh wasn't something for me. And I somewhat agreed with her for a little bit, but then later on, a great friend in the house of Yahweh came and encouraged me to remain. But that was even before I was baptized. And that was how quickly, how easily the word of Yahweh could just be plucked out of your heart. You don't have to be baptized to fall away. Baptism is just one of the many laws that you keep along the way of keeping all of the laws of Yahweh. And of course, yes, baptism is very important, but it could occur even before baptism. As I said, I wasn't even baptized at that time. And then the second seed is the one that go through, that doesn't endure the persecution, as Yahshua explained in the parable. And of course, we all face this. And at that point, you have a choice to make, whether you're going to remain in the house of Yahweh or not. And some endure the persecution, some don't. And the persecution could come in any form. It could be from an employer, it could be from a loved one, it could be from a family member. It could come in any form. Now, bear in mind, all of this is under the umbrella that we are covering here, which is to come out from among them. So just kind of bear all of this in mind. So, and I experienced that second one myself, simply because I was a year into the house of Yahweh at the time, but my understanding of everything just wasn't up to the point that it needed to be at. So there was a lot of gossip and rumors and speculations and so forth. This was around the time of the 2 witnesses. And it wasn't so much the doctrine of the 2 witnesses that I would say shook my faith in any way, but it was just the rumors and the gossip and the slander. And there was no one to rebut it at the time because it was a situation, and it's a long story, so I don't want to go into the whole thing. But it was almost akin to, when Moshe went up to receive the law and he was gone for a period of time, and the people said, well, this guy Moshe, we don't know what has become of him, let us go and worship God. So it was similar to that, somewhat in that line. But, again, these are things that Yahweh brings you through. Now, I want to get into the 3rd and the 4th seed. I know everyone is well aware of the 4th seed because the 4th seed is the one that continues to bring forth fruit. But let's look at Matthew chapter 13, and let's look at verse 22. It says, "Now that which was sown among the thorns is he who hears the words, the laws, and the prophets, but the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches chokes the word, the teaching of the law and the prophets, and he becomes unfruitful. And if you're looking at your scriptures, you could underline this or you could circle it. He becomes unfruitful. In other words, he was producing fruit, but then he becomes unfruitful. Okay, so it's something to understand, and it's something just a caution for us if we want to be that fourth seed, the one that continues to bring forth fruit. Let's look at Yachanan Mark chapter 4, reading verse 19. But the cares, dealing with this third seed, and these are the ones who are sown among thorns. They hear the word, the laws and the prophets, but the cares, anxieties, distractions of this world, or the deceitful attractiveness of riches, or the lust for other things, begin to creep in and choke the word, the law and the prophets, and it becomes unfruitful. So you can see there's a process that goes on. And if you have been here long enough, you would have seen people become unfruitful in the house of Yahweh because of these very things that has been identified in the scriptures, the cares, the deceitfulness of riches, the attractiveness of it, and it begins to choke the word. And let's look at Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8, and let's look at verse 14. It says, the seed that fell among the thorns are those who, when they heard, go out and are choked with worries and anxieties, riches and pleasures of this age, this life, and bring no fruit to perfection. And bring no fruit to perfection. And this is the key, brothers, that yes, even though we are in the house of Yahweh, and yes, even though we have been here a long time, we still need to bring fruit to perfection. That's the charge that Yahweh has laid upon us. That's the charge that Yahshua Messiah said in Matthew 5:48, become perfect just as my Father in heaven who is perfect. Notice verse 15. But the seed that fell on the rich ground are those who, having heard the word, the law and the prophets, with an honest and righteous heart, keep it and bring forth fruit with patience through persistence. And this is really where we have to be at. So it's just not enough to be here. We have to bring forth fruit. We have to continue to do the work. We have to practice righteous conduct. We have to be of righteous behavior. We cannot let the pleasures and the distractions of this world allow us to become unfruitful. We cannot allow the anxieties and the worries of this life to choke the word. Otherwise, we would go back into the world and we wouldn't be the 1 out of 4, as Pastor made reference to here in verse 17. He says, 1 out of 4 will remain strong, he said. That's what he showed in the house of Yahweh. The key, as Yahshua said also in Matthew chapter, I believe in, what I'm looking for is Matthew chapter 24, it's really enduring until the end. That's really the key. Matthew 24 verse 13, but he who endures until the end, the same will have the salvation. And not just in the end that we're in, but we have to remain bringing forth fruit. We have to continue pushing ourselves to convert. We have to get rid of the things that is not part of Yahweh's character that we see in ourselves, and we have to keep putting forth that effort. Now in verse 18, he's talking about this individual who wrote him this letter, and after the trouble arose, that is the persecution, he said they decided to go back to their King James Version, because they said Pastor had changed so many things in the book of Yahweh. And he said, of course, they didn't even study the book of Yahweh. They didn't study the book of Israel. They didn't study the magazines, or they would know better. We didn't change anything. We, in fact, the commentators, the world's authoritative books, show that these things were the original writings. We put them back like they were. Surely anyone knows the name is Yahweh, and his son's name is Yahshua, and then he talks about the Encyclopedia Judaica showing that the name is Yahweh and Yahshua, and of course the artifacts that was found showing that the name of Yahweh was on the apostles' keepers over his door. Let's look at verse 20. It says, if they would have read, they could have proven these things for themselves. But I want to show them that I got salvation from the King James Version, and anyone else can too. If you know it, you know, it's all there, you know. And he says the book of Yahweh just makes it easier. But one of the points that Pastor makes here is that, we have to prove things ourselves. And if we stop proving things, that is, if we stop listening to the sermons, if we stop reading the prophetic word magazines, if we stop reading the newsletters, or we halfway pay attention to it, then we're no longer proving these things. And of course, if we don't prove the things that are given to us in the house of Yahweh, well, guess what starts creeping into your life? The worries, the anxieties, and the deceitfulness of riches. That's where your mind starts drifting to. And eventually, if given enough time, it will choke the word. You will become unfruitful. Let's look at 2 Timothy chapter 2. Because we have to prove the things which is through study. And that study is simply reading the information that is set out. When I say simply reading, you got to read it, but you also have to take your time in doing so. Go through, make certain cross-references in your notes and etc. So you could tie that information together so that it could be solid within our minds. And another aspect of it is we have to beg Yahweh for understanding, because even though we read certain things, brothers, it don't mean that we always understand it. And sometimes it's that understanding of the things that we are being taught that is lacking. And it doesn't just come automatically. You have to beg Yahweh for it. You have to beg Yahweh to understand certain things. And it really helps when you ask him to help you to understand, because that will help in changing our behavior and conduct, especially if we have difficulty in certain areas. But concerning proving, in 2 Timothy chapter 3, reading from verse 14, it says, but as for you, continue in the things which you have learned and have firmly believed, knowing from whom you have learned them, and that from a child you have known the holy scriptures, which are able to make you wise unto salvation, through the faith which is in Yahshua Messiah. All scripture that is given through inspiration of Yahweh is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of Yahweh can become perfect, thoroughly furnished for every righteous work. So there's a proving that we have to do, that we have to undergo as we take this information in. Now, in the rest of the verses here, Pastor gets back into Admiral William Fallon and what took place with his forced resignation. Then he gets into Revelation chapter 6, showing that, and if we turn quickly to verse 28, he says that power, of course, in verse 8, that's Revelation 6:8, it means authority. And the basic point that Pastor is getting at here is to show that the nuclear wars that is being spoken of within this sermon, the famine that he speaks about within this sermon, he's showing that it was given to the quartet authority to bring about these things. And what he was showing, and there's an article that we didn't have time to get into that he read from, that was done by, that involved Henry Kissinger, that showed that many of these things were planned in advance. The wars, the famine, a lot of decisions were made in advance, and they're carrying out these decisions that were already planned. So he's trying to show us that, first of all, prophecy shows that this is what's going to take place, and then he's showing that it was given to mankind's government to do these things, and then he's showing through the articles that they're fulfilling and they're carrying out their plans. So Yahweh bless the understanding. I'll ask for everyone to please stand. And I'll have the privilege and opportunity to turn the class over to the great priest, the great Kohan, Michael Hawkins. Praise Yahweh.
Shalom in. Please be seated. Remember now, we're covering this. Come out of her, my people, okay? Come out from among them and be separate. This is number 3. Touch not the unclean. And of course, this is great information because as Pastor was teaching, to come out of this world, and it's leading up to the great feast, the great Passover. So keep those things in mind as this material is covered. Now he went on talking about reading these articles about how the United Nations reports about the countries worldwide, and it talked about the financial reports, the global famine, and of course a rise in HIV and AIDS and these STDs that are spread worldwide. So let's take off here on verse 63. He says, now this one he says, we haven't printed it yet. He said, but I'm going to. This is in 2008, the year of global food crisis. The year of global food crisis, 2008. He says, well, the world we're seeing, he says, we're seeing this, he says, but they don't know what's bringing it about, of course. They think it just happens. And like everything else, everything just happens. There's always, but there's a cause for it, right? The scripture says, curse doesn't come without a cause. There's a reason for these things. And he says, of course, this is a scheme by Satan to bring the world down. Think about that. This is a scheme, okay? This is all part of the plan that Satan schemes. Just like remember in Jeremiah 23, it says how her prophets scheme and plan to deceive the people and make them forget about Yahweh's name. What's the same with this is that this is a scheme by Satan to bring the world down. And of course, the quartet, as far as they know, right now, he says, as far as they know, they can stop what they've given power to stop. That is with nuclear proliferation and depopulation of the earth to a certain extent. And as Kissinger said, you can control people through these things, through war, and of course through hunger and war. So these are two things that's spoken about in history itself. Jump down to verse 66 here. He says, but 2008, the year, now this is what he's saying, the year of global food crisis. It's the new face of hunger, a perfect storm of food scarcity, global warming, and rocketing oil prices. Of course, they're making the profit off the oil, right? Remember now, it says, hurt not the oil, because we've got a stake in those countries over in the Middle East, and of course, it's oil. Hurt not the oil and hurt not our lifestyle, which is portrayed by the word that they translated wine, okay? But it means lifestyle of the West, okay? And if you remember what it says here in you can read that. Forgot to make it a larger print, but the lifestyle of the wicked. Deuteronomy 32, and 33, it says, for their vines are vines of Sodom, and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are the grapes of Gaul, which is, of course, the poison of God worship. Their clusters are filled with bitterness, the bitterness of idolatry and God worship, the worship of the Elohim. And their wine is a dragon's poison and the cruel venom of asp. Okay, in Proverbs 4:17, for they eat the bread of violence and they drink the wine of violence. Okay, and they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. Isaiah 22:13, but behold, there is joy and gladness, slaying of oxen, killing sheep, eating flesh, and drinking wine. For they say, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we will die. That is that's their mindset, is to party down because you're going to die. It's all going to come to an end. So they don't even have in their minds the concept of even thinking about, of seeking Yahweh, because as the scripture says, they just won't repent. All right, verse 67, it says, a perfect storm. Continue on with this article. It says, a perfect storm of food scarcity, global warming, rocketing oil prices, and the world population explosion is plunging humanity into the biggest crisis of the 21st century. He says, if you listen closely, this man says this is false. We have enough food to feed the entire world right now in America. We could raise enough food here in America to raise or to feed the entire world. That's no problem. The ocean now, he says, if the food wasn't being destroyed in the ocean, there'd be enough fish in the ocean to feed the entire world. And of course, there's a scheme. Notice that scheme again. And it seems to be a plan of taking place to bring that down and to destroy the fish population. Okay? To destroy the fish population. You know, you think about it, it's a scheme, okay, about the fish. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 and 31 through 31, it says, and Yahweh blessed him, meaning man, and Yahweh said to him, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth, right? He said, fill the earth and subdue it, and have rulership. And notice the first thing he says is have rulership over the fish of the sea. Have rulership over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So Yahweh gave this authority to man to be the steward of the earth, to take care of all of these things. Not to pollute it, not to end up doing certain things that we'll see later that has completely destroyed these things. And verse 29, Yahweh said, behold, I've given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food, and also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life. I have given every green herb for food, and it was so. Meaning, it was great. In verse 31, and Yahweh saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very right. So the evening and the morning was the sixth day. Okay, so notice, everything that Yahweh created was right. It was perfect the way he had made it. It's just man has come along and messed these things up, okay? So this is all a scheme of Satan to bring this down, because she knows if she can bring the food supply down, then of course it's going to affect mankind. Let's jump over down to the bottom of the page, verse 71. So once the nuclear war starts, that's not the end of it. That will bring on more starvation. Countries will not stand by knowing that there's food in another country and they got nuclear bombs to buy it with. They're not going to stand by. They would rather die with this country that's got the wheat than for them to die and let the country come in and take over their country. And this is the way the nations are seeing this whole scenario that's set up right now. They can see it now, and they're finally becoming alarmed about it, okay? Because, food is becoming scarce in certain places of the world. And many, many millions and millions of people are dying because they just simply don't have enough food. And also, of course, the global warming has affected many places to where, they can't grow anything because the ground's just dry. There's no rain. There's nothing. Verse 72, he says, and for the first time, this is the rest of this article here, and for the first time in history, says experts, the impact is spreading from the developing to the developed world. Notice, it's spreading from that to us. More than 73 million people in 78 countries that depend on food handouts from the United Nations World Food Program, WFP, are facing reduced rations this year. That's even increased, because I was looking that up. I came across the same thing. I didn't realize it. I was reading it, and I looked in the book. I thought, hey, this is the same thing this is talking about. It's this World Food Program's report. It was 100 and something million now, and then it may be more than 100, and many more countries. More than 78 countries as well. But one thing I do remember what it says here is that I did write down WFP Global Report on Food Crisis. This was in 2019, so this is the report that they came out with last year. Conflict and insecurity. Conflict and insecurity are likely to remain the primary drivers of food security crisis during 2019. Conflict is expected to persist, and local insecurity and intercommunal violence will continue to undermine food availability and access. So they know that this crisis, this violence, the wars and the the control, the hunger for control is taking over, and the people are suffering. Continue on, it says, the increasing scarcity of food is the biggest crisis looming for the world, according to the WFP officials. At the same time, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization has warned that rising prices have triggered a food crisis in 36 countries, all of which will need extra help. The bank points out that global food prices have risen by 75% since 2000. While wheat prices have increased by 200%. If prices keep rising more and more, people around the globe will be unable to afford the food. Okay? It's just exactly as Henry Kissinger said. You can control the people by controlling the food. Okay? Now, of course, the United Nations Security Council, they condemn the use of starvation as a weapon of war. But, how can they ensure that it's not going to be practiced, And, of course, we know from history, we've seen to where they even sent support and stuff to some of these countries. And, of course, the leaders would be the ones who would take it and hoard it all and not even give it out to the people. And if they did, then they would charge them outrageous prices, instead of giving it to them like it's supposed to be given to them. Now, verse 75, as well as being rural. Okay, and he says the rural here is out in the country. The profile of the new hunger poor is also urban, which is new. There is food available in the markets and shops. It's just that people can't afford to buy it. This is the new face of hunger. People come. They come with bundles and bundles of money. And that's how much the money is useless, It's the value of it has just gone down to where it can cost them thousands of dollars to try and get food, and it's worthless. In India last year, it says more than 25,000 farmers took their own lives. They committed suicide, driven by despair, by grain shortages and farming debts. Okay? Here's farmers that are taking their lives. Imagine how depressed they are. And the farmers are one of the most exalted employments that there is on the face of this earth, because every individual on earth, owes their life to a farmer because they raise the food for them to survive. And yet, here they are, people are getting 25,000 farmers. I don't know what the latest statistics is, but that's just totally outrageous. But they're taking their life. And of course, people are getting alarmed about it because they see in what's taking place. Let's jump down to verse 87. He says, talking about China. And of course, he says in China, now before that, he's talking about the STDs and stuff, how it's affecting the teenagers and so forth. And he talks about China, and he says that about 50 years ago or more, he says China was an example because they didn't have juvenile delinquencies, because in China, everybody helped raise everybody else's child. If they seen a child do wrong, whether it was their own child or not, they would correct the child. And so this made the children grow up more well-behaved and so forth. But you see that this is not taking place. And this is the reason why STDs among the young people, it's not just the young people, of course, but STDs are taken over, especially in the younger generation, because Satan knows, again, it's all part of her scheme. She knows that if she can get the young people, get that younger generation, well, then you've affected every other generation after that, So if you can work on the young generation, by the time they get old enough to where they will be having their children and so forth, children, generation after generation after generation after generation, will get weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker, to where you see now, we're carrying 6,000 years of curses on us in our lives in itself, So you can see how this is working on the world. Now, verse 92, it says, more older adults catch STDs. He says, yes, it doesn't make any difference what your age is. It's out there, everywhere. Right now, it's everywhere. And, sometimes people forget about that. But there are the older people, even those that are in these retirement homes and stuff like that, they're still out there And they're still catching STDs because of their lifestyles. It doesn't stop. Well, he gets here and says, you know, it talks about superbugs, how deadly superbugs invade hospital screenings. So it shows that they're screening, but in spite of that, it's still getting through. You know, they can't catch it. And these things become more and more deadly. You know, this is why they call them superbugs. You know, and it's a scary thing when you think about it. And people, you know, Yahweh spares us, his people, because we are his people and we are doing his work and warning the world about these things. But it's this lifestyle that they're leading. It's a dangerous, dangerous world out there. Philly, meaning Philadelphia, finds 56 drugs in its water supply. He says this is also alarming. He says, you know, back in the sanctuary on TNP Lane, the press room now, I bought this out years ago, showing a prophecy that said that the world would be, while Yahweh's bringing you up to health, bringing his house to health, the world would be drinking its own urine. That prophecy, brethren, is coming to pass in this article right here called Philly Finds 56 Drugs in Its Water Supply. He says, and someone comes out, I bet you, and says, oh, our water's safe. You know, shit, go ahead and drink it, he says. And they'll be more confused than ever. But the study finds that drugs seeping into drinking water, fish, and wildlife affected by contaminated water. The specimens will be flown across the country to laboratories where aquatic toxicologists are studying what occurs to the fish that live in water contaminated with at least 13 different medications. At least 13 different medications. Now, think about that. Here is the fish and the wildlife. What have they done? You know? They haven't done anything. They themselves have been created to try to actually enjoy life itself and to do what Yahweh has created them to do. And yet mankind has gone in here and, as it says, at least 13 different medications is found. He says, now these medications are medicines that people took for diabetes, for syphilis, for AIDS, and of course they were flushed down into the water. And of course, their recycling plants doesn't take this out, so they go back into the drinking water. And they know that. You know, they know that these plants, these recycling plants and stuff, it doesn't take this stuff out of the water. They know that, and they admit it. But yet people continue to drink it. And then they recycle it and recycle it and recycle it. You know, especially if they live next to an area, remember, where there are rivers, because they'll take the water and recycle it, and then all the stuff goes into the wastewater, and then they pour the waste back out into the river, and then the next city down the river takes that water in and recycles it, and they do the same thing again and again and again. So it continues a continual cycle that goes on and on and on and on. And so they know that there is no way that they are actually drinking this clean water. 13 different medications, verse 99. 13 different medications from over-the-counter painkillers to prescription antibiotics and mood stabilizers, notice. All of these things that people are taking, you know. Painkillers, of course, that's something that is, overly prescribed for people of the world. You know, if they have a little ache and pain, they go to the doctor and they get a painkiller for something. Never thinking about what's causing the pain. You know, never look to try to examine themselves. You know, what law am I breaking, and what am I doing to bring this curse upon me? You know, and of course, antibiotics. Well, we know that the antibiotics have gotten to a point to where they don't work, because the more they use them, the weaker they become because of what they're doing to them. And mood stabilizers. You know, you got to take a pill to get your mood right, to get you in the right mood. You know, this is really pathetic, but that's all part of the lifestyle of people, because people are oppressed. You know, and you see it in these commercials and stuff, and people get oppressed, and they, you know, see if this drug is right for you, you know, and so forth. Ask your doctor. Might kill you, but that's all right. Before you get down, maybe it'll change your mood, Just doesn't make any sense. A 5-month Associated Press investigation has determined that trace amounts of many of the pharmaceuticals we take to stay healthy are seeping into drinking water supplies, and a growing body of research indicates that this could harm humans. What do you know? I wonder how much that research has cost them, That's sink in millions and millions of dollars of research to find out if this drinking water can harm humans. Wow. Why don't you just open up a battery and drink some of the acid, see if that harms you, It makes as much sense, because of course it's going to. All of these things are being taken into the body, Of course, common sense tells you that it's going to harm you, especially when you see it harming the fish. And yet these men don't even have enough sense to know that it's could be harmful to humans. Because notice, growing body of research indicates that this could harm humans. They don't say it does, they just say it could harm humans. You see, because they know a lawsuit could be on them. It's all about greed and hatred. But people aren't the only ones who consume the water. There's more and more evidence that some animals that live in and drink from streams and lakes are seriously affected. Pharmaceuticals in the water are being blamed for severe reproductive problems. They got fish now that both male and female on the same body. Now that is very, that is so cruel. So incredibly cruel that mankind has done this to nature. It's like he's supposed to be rulership over these things, but he's not ruling properly, you see. It's a force rule, and this is exactly what the Catholic Church has always taught, to force these things on him, because they're actually forcing nature itself to partake of these things, of the sins that they themselves have. He says, you talk about killing our food supply, in the fresh waters and the ocean waters, it's everywhere. But he says, we've been bringing this out for years, brethren. It's in the ancient prophetic word magazines, in the broadcast, because prophecy shows what's going to take place. You got to read in the book of Revelation, you see where it says the oceans, the rivers, the streams, and so forth will be turned to blood. So there's going to be death in the oceans as well as on the land, Yahweh showed. Let's go to verse 105 at the bottom of the page. He says, this is a sin-sick world, brethren. It's getting sicker all the time. A very sin-sick world. Because sin makes you sick. Sin makes a person sick. And it's a very sin-sick world because, of course, Christianity doing away with Yahweh's laws is what's caused this. He says, I want to read that to you in the King James Version. He says, the old faithful King James Version of mine that I knew long before we made the book of Yahweh, of course. He says the book of Yahweh is so much better because it takes you back to the original, or it's the closest thing to the original. So he says, turn over to Isaiah 24. He says, I'll read it from the King James Version. He says, pretty much it's the same, except that they took out the name Yahweh and they put in the name Lord. And put a few other things in there that don't really mean anything, that even the dictionaries say they're not divine words, meaning they shouldn't have been there. They should have been used. They shouldn't have been used to replace the Creator's name. And when people see the King James Version, that is the authorized King James Version, right? When you look in the title page, it's the authorized King James Version. And so that's the one. That's the one that St. Paul used. He used the King James Version. Jesus read from it too. I think there was a preacher that said that one time. Oh boy, the King James Version. Yeah, he probably had the pocket-sized New Testament stuck in his robe, right? Okay. Let's see. So he goes on. He says, he talks about the Dead Sea Scrolls. How when they went to Israel, they actually saw the name of Yahweh in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because you can see pictures of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you see Yahweh's name written in there. And many of them, you have the the Hebrew, but then you have, when it comes to Yahweh's name, it's in the ancient Hebrew, the Paleo Hebrew, that really stands out. So you can really see what Yahweh's name is. You know, there's even Greek versions as well. Whenever they translated into Greek, you know, they when they got to Yahweh's name, they would actually leave Yahweh's name in the Hebrew, right there in the Greek. You had all this Greek, when you got to Yahweh's name, it was in Hebrew. You know, they left it that way. So it shows you that Yahweh's name, where it should have been and how it should stay there and remain there, and that mankind was the one that took it out. Of course, that was a prophecy, remember, okay? Because Yahweh had to see who would believe. In Isaiah 24:1, he says, behold, Yahweh, he says, I'm going to put the name there. Behold, Yahweh maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattered abroad the inhabitants. So it's in turmoil. It's in turmoil. Now, verse 2, he says, and it shall be as with the people, so with the preacher. As with the people, so with the preacher, notice, okay? He says there's a little 2 right there, and it shows those, it means those in religious power over in the center reference. The priests or the preachers are the religious organizations. So this is the reason why in the house, in the book of Yahweh, it says, as with the people, so with the priests, right? Let me show you some here. This is in Hosea. Hosea 4:6-11. It says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because they have rejected knowledge, and will also reject you. For you will be no priest in me, because you have forgotten the law of Yahweh, and I will also forget your children. The more they increased, the more they sinned against me. Therefore, I will change their glory into shame. They feed on the sin offerings of my people, while they set their hearts on their iniquity. And it will be like people, like priests, notice. So I will punish them for their ways and reward them for their doings. And they will eat, but they will not have enough. They will commit whoredom, but it will not increase, because they have forsaken Yahweh and do not heed. Whoredom, wine, and new wine take away the understanding. Of course, remember that wine, okay? The wine is the lifestyle of the people, the God worship, okay? But notice it says, like the people, like the priest, okay? And that's what he's talking about in Isaiah 24, verse 2 here. As with the people, so with the preacher, so with the priest, okay? And then he says, as with the servant, so with the master, so with the maid, so with their mistress. So it's showing everybody here. As with the lender, so with the borrower, and so forth. And then verse 3, it says, and the land will be utterly emptied. He says, depopulated, as Henry Kissinger said, and utterly spoiled. It's going to be destroyed with war and with famine. That verse in Isaiah 24, verse 3, the land shall be utterly emptied. Now you see the Hebrew words there, okay? The land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled, for Yahweh has spoken this word. If you notice the word emptied, okay, it's repeated twice in the Hebrew. The word spoiled is repeated twice in the Hebrew. See, 1962 and then 1238. Well, 1238, which means empties, it actually means to pour out, that is to empty, figuratively, to depopulate, okay? It's exactly what Kissinger said, to depopulate the earth. And 962, which is the word spoiled, means to plunder or to take as a spoil. So that's exactly what their plans are. The elite want to depopulate this earth and take the spoil away from the people. Okay, jump down to on page 115 here. Jump over to page 120. Verse 127. Back to Isaiah 24:6. He says, therefore, well, verse 5. He says, the earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the law of Yahweh. They've changed the ordinance. They've broken the everlasting covenant. In verse 6, therefore has the curse devoured the earth. So therefore the food supplies are going to be shut off because of you. You're a contributing factor to it, he says. All this is causing the STDs on your girls. You have more than 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. He says starvation is going to come to you. Nuclear wars is going to start over in the fourth part of the earth that will wind up here. because the people are hungry and so forth. He says, notice verse 130. This is the trap. Okay, remember the scheme of Satan. This is the trap that you're setting for yourselves. You've already set it. In fact, there's no turning back. There's no turning back. There's nothing that can be done to turn things back. It's already set in motion. Okay? The courts of heaven have decided and they've set the sentence, and this is what will take place. Mankind is on the way to his own destruction. Yahweh said everything here, as he said in Revelations 9, you would not repent, even if the third of those people killed over a fourth part of the earth in and around the great river Euphrates by nuclear war, and you will still not repent. Even though they see these things going to take place, they're still not going to repent. And of course, Zechariah 14 shows you that they're going to destroy themselves. He says, Zechariah in the King James Version shows you there'll be about 2 billion people left that will actually turn to keeping Yahweh's laws, and Yahweh will keep them alive. But you won't be there because you will not repent, or any other one who wants to persecute Yahweh's house at this time, because there is no persecution. There is no protection. If someone persecutes Yahweh's house, then they're against Yahweh's house. And if they're against Yahweh's house, well, then of course this is the place of safety, the only place of protection. If they choose not to do that, then of course they're going to die. So remember, come out of her, my people. And this is what it's talking about, is coming out, touching not the unclean, separating ourselves, getting ready for the great Passover that will soon be upon us. Okay, to be thinking about these things and getting ready. Remember to start getting ready to start cleansing and so forth. It's getting time for the feast coming up soon. So keep those things in mind, man.